Okay, so we should imagine you already know a little bit about the Union Chain Bridge Crossing Borders Connecting Communities project already, seeing as you're here. But in short, a 200-year-old suspension bridge linking Scotland and Northumberland crossing the River Tweed is currently being conserved. Our guest speaker tonight has been there, done that, and got the t-shirt, as it were. Although the cultural divide on the Medway is not really quite the same as the Tweed, I think the only difference is that you are a person of Kent or a Kentish person. Is that the difference?
Yeah, a man of Kent or a Kentish maid.
I was trying not to be sexist. So, yeah, indeed. I'm glad I remembered that correctly, though. So Sue Thredder is Bridge Clerk, that is Chief Executive of the Rochester Bridge Trust. She's very highly qualified, and I counted this afternoon, she actually does have more letters after her name than in it. She's awarded an honorary doctorate by the University of West London recently, and she's also been awarded an Outstanding Achievement Award from the Institution of Civil Engineers for her work promoting engineering to younger people. She's currently working for a project for ICE on John Rennie. Sam Brown, who designed the Union Chain Bridge, who seems rarely to have admitted any skills deficiency on his own part, he did really respect and defer to Rennie in all matters to do with stonemasonry, including the stonemasonry on the Union Chain Bridge. So we actually, as a team, maybe actually be able to help Sue with her work on John Rennie. Recently named, as in I think last week, one of the top women in engineering for her work on the Rochester bridges in Kent. We're delighted that Sue's made time to speak to us tonight. So please, can we welcome Sue Thredder to tell us about the trials, the tribulations, and the triumphs too of conserving an historic bridge.
Thank you very much. It's a very nice introduction. I'm quite pleased to see it's a reversal of my usual evening today with mainly women and very few men. It's usually the other way around, so it's very nice to see. I'm going to really gallop through this evening because there's lots of things I could tell you about Rochester Bridge, and as you'll see, you know, any section of it could last an hour. So I'm going to go very, very quickly. And all my slides are pictures, so there's nothing to read because I thought it would be nice just to sit back and enjoy looking at some pretty pictures. So I hope that's okay. So let me share my screen and we'll get started. This is always the bit when you're a little bit nervous. Yeah, out of the way. There we go. Can we see? I've got a problem with this window popping up again. I've had this before. I don't know how to get rid of it. Does anybody know how to get rid of that little window?
Not particularly, but it doesn't bother me if it doesn't bother
anybody else.
As long as it's not
too much in your way, I will carry on with it there. This happened to me before. Let me just get back to my first slide. Okay. So as has been said, I'm Sue Thredder. I'm the Bridge Clerk and Chief Executive of the Rochester Bridge Trust. I'm going to divide this presentation into 3 parts. For about the first 20 minutes, I'll talk about the history of Rochester Bridge and the Rochester Bridge Trust. And I'm going to cover 2,000 years of history in 20 minutes. So that gives you an idea of how fast we're moving. I'll then focus for about 15 minutes on our refurbishment project that we've just completed, which was a once-in-a-generation renovation. And then I'll tell you a little bit more about the wide range of other things that we do at the Trust, which you might find interesting given the projects you're working on at the moment. And that should leave us time at the end for our questions. Okay, so firstly, I need to locate Rochester for those of you who are not familiar with our geography down this end of the country. London is there on this map of Roman roads, and Rochester is here. And as we know, the Romans like a nice straight line. So we've got Canterbury here, where all the Roman invaders and the Roman army converged. And then you draw a straight line from Canterbury to London, and that has to cross the River Medway at Rochester. So until the Romans came, if you wanted to move east-west through Kent, you had to do it on ancient trackways further south. But the Romans don't want to mess about with any of that, using fords and so on. So they built a bridge. And it was almost certainly the first large bridge built by the Romans in Britain because of its location. You can see where it is. You can't get out of Kent really without having a bridge at Rochester. And we know that this was the first bridge built in that location, that there wasn't one before, because the engineering challenges of building at Rochester are so severe that no civilization prior to the Romans had the technology. We have a tidal range of over 7 meters at Rochester, which makes it incredibly difficult to build a bridge in the water. And we know a lot about what it looked like from archaeological excavation, but also there's a surviving Roman bridge in North Germany, which looks, when you look at our archaeological investigation, it looks exactly like this bridge in North Germany. So we know a lot about it. It was 500 feet long and only 10 feet wide, made with stone piers and just a flat timber deck, made of 3 square beams and then planked across. Almost certainly had no bracing underneath the deck, unlike some illustrations you might have seen of Caesar's Bridge across the Rhine, where there's lots of cross bracing underneath. This was just planks with, just beams with planks across. And there was also no parapet on the bridge. And we know that from all the coroner's reports which survive of people falling off it, either being pushed or just stumbling and falling into the water. So there was no vertical parapet. And while the Roman Empire was strong, the bridge was maintained by the Roman army. But when once the Romans withdrew, responsibility for maintaining the bridge fell to the landowners of a civitas, which is the sort of civic organised region around the settlement of de Robrevai, the Rochester, the fort by the bridges. And that settlement had only grown up because the bridge was there. It had become a trading post, the bridge needed to be defended, and gradually a settlement arose. And it was the people from that area and the hinterland that were responsible for maintaining Rochester Bridge. Then as time went on and that sort of establishment started to disintegrate, a new system arose, which was known as bridge work. And what happened there was a very large area around the bridge. So here's Rochester Bridge here, and the River Medway coming in. This is the Thames up there. This area was responsible for maintaining the bridge. So to give you an idea, that's about 40 miles, I should think, to the edge of the area there. You know, probably 35 this way, 20 that way. So this is an enormous area. And I'm talking here about from the 7th century onwards. And the way it worked was that each section of the old Roman bridge was allocated to a different group of manors and parishes to take care of. And the reason we know about all of this is a document which survives called the Bridge Work List, which dates from about the 7th century, but the earliest surviving copy we have of it is 1120. And this is just one line from it, if you like. And basically what it's saying here, it's saying the 5th pier of the bridge, so it's identifying which bit of the bridge, is the Archbishop's. So the Archbishop of Canterbury was responsible for organising repair and maintenance. And that's then that pier is then allocated to a whole list of parishes in this Rootham, Maidstone, Waterbury and so on, these great long lists. And then it tells you exactly what else they're supposed to look after. So they have to look after the 5th pier, and then they have to look after 4 rods worth of cross planking and 3 beams of the bridge. So that's how it was maintained in the post-Roman period, was by this allocation to the parishes. So anytime anything needed to be repaired, they would go to that group of parishes. They'd look at the list, go to that group of parishes and get manpower and material and money and so on. And that system of the contributory parishes survived in one form or another all the way up to 1908. So it's an incredibly long-lived process. Now, Rochester Bridge features quite highly in some pretty significant events in English history, if you like, apart from the fact that for centuries it's the only way to get to the continent. So if you want to fight in the 100 Years' War, you're going to go across it. No doubt William the Conqueror went across it after they built the castle at Rochester. You know, Henry VIII came across it when he came to meet Anne of Cleves. Rochester Bridge is, you can't avoid it if you want to go towards France. But it particularly features in the Barons' Wars with King John, and it was fortified against King John as they were protecting Rochester Castle, which you can see in the incredibly violent and not very accurate but quite good fun film Ironclad, if you want to hunt that one out. And it was also fortified and later destroyed partially by Simon de Montfort, who managed to set fire to it when he was attacking Rochester. So pretty much every event as you go through history, you'll find tales of Rochester Bridge. And the peace coach from bringing news of Waterloo went across the bridge up to London to tell everybody what was happening. So it's really there. Anything that's happened has happened via Rochester Bridge. Okay, so far I've just been talking about the bridge and not the trust. So how does the trust come about? Well, the Roman bridge stood for nearly 13 centuries. In 1381, the River Medway froze solid, and then when the thaw came, the ice flows and all the flood water swept down the Medway and destroyed the Roman bridge. It took away all the stone piers, and we were left with nothing. Now, by that time, of course, all the towns had all built up around the bridge. Rochester on one side, Strood on the other, Gillingham, Chatham, all the rest of it had all started to become established. So suddenly Rochester's got no bridge, and yet its whole society is built around it. So the contributory parishes should have got together and funded the building of a new bridge, but they weren't ever able to actually get them to get together properly to do that. And luckily for Rochester, two benefactors arrive on the scene and agree to fund a new bridge. And in this period we're talking about, so the 1380s, contributing to bridge building was seen as a pious act. So our two founding knights, there were knights of one from Kent and one from Cheshire, were looking for ways to do public works, and it was a part of a way of shortening your time in purgatory. And they got together and they built a new stone bridge for Rochester, which was actually 100 yards further upstream, away from the ruins of the Roman bridge. And they built this bridge, and it was described as sumptuosissimus by Thomas of Walsingham, so most magnificent, one of the greatest bridges of the land. And the two founders, who were called Sir John de Cobham and Sir Robert Knowles, also founded a chantry chapel, a bridge chapel, which we still have at Rochester. It's a bridgehead chapel, but it is a proper bridge chapel. And there are only 6 surviving bridge chapels left in England that we know are definitely bridge chapels. And your closest one would be Morpeth Chantry, which is again, it is another bridge chapel and the bridgehead model like this one. So the benefactors have established that new stone bridge and they built themselves a chapel. But how was the bridge to be paid for and maintained was the next question. How do we keep it going? Because when the contributory parishes were tested, the system had broken down. So what they did was they went around and they persuaded their friends and acquaintances to give land and money for the perpetual maintenance of Rochester Bridge. And Richard II created by letters patent a charitable trust, in effect, called the Wardens and Commonalty of Rochester Bridge. And that was able to own land. So here's Richard II giving his letters patent. It was able to own land and to sue and be sued and exist as a corporate body. That was 1399, the letters patent were granted, and that's the date from which we date the foundation of the Rochester Bridge Trust, even though the actual foundation of the operation really goes back to the 7th century, because there had been people organising bridge maintenance right the way back from then, which makes us probably the oldest. If you count from the 7th century, we're probably the oldest charity in the country. If you count from 1399, which is our official founding date, then we're still one of the oldest. And they persuaded their friends and acquaintances to donate, and our most famous benefactor is this chap, who is Dick Whittington, who gave £40 for the maintenance of the bridge. And the important thing that they did, they didn't just give money, they gave land, and we still own a lot of the original endowment land, and that's where our income and our modern assets come from that pay from the bridges today. So the Bridge Trust set up in 1399, it works pretty well for a while, but by the time we get to Queen Elizabeth's reign, things were in a bit of disarray, the bridge wasn't being maintained as it should have been, and so there was a Reform Act, two Rochester Bridge Acts actually, which introduced the process of democratic elections for the wardens of the bridge. So everyone in those contributory parishes had to send somebody every year to vote at Rochester Castle to elect the wardens of the bridge. And they also, originally there'd only been 2, but they extended the number. So they created this process where the contributory parishes democratically elected the wardens. And we still have echoes of that process now, where half of my trustees are nominated by the local authorities within the areas of the contributory parishes. So that hasn't gone away, and that dates back to Elizabeth's reign. After the reforms happened, there was a long period of stability, and this is the time when the trust starts to build up its collections of art and furniture and paintings, and it builds itself a new headquarters building and so on. So you get a nice long period of stability, interrupted by the Civil War. So there was a civil war battle on the bridge, and there was a while all the trustees were called Major this and Colonel that, but then they disappear again and they were back to Sir and so on after a while. But it went on for quite a long time until we get to the Industrial Revolution. So of course, then we've got this old medieval bridge, which has been there, you know, several hundred years, but now we've got far more road traffic, far more river traffic trying to get across the bridge. And this is a cross section of the medieval bridge, and you can see how narrow those gaps are between the piers here. And of course, the narrower the gap, the faster the water, and you end up with what's called a hydraulic jump. You end up with the water level higher on one side than the other. And remember what I said earlier, this is a really tidal river. You can only just make it out on this plan, but there's the high tide level and low tide is down here. So you can imagine the challenges of trying to operate and trade up and down the river, where twice a day you've only got this much clearance under the arches. So that was really problematic, and the Times described it as an infernal nuisance in this time, and it was just come to see like a dam across the river in effect. And it was very narrow as well. You couldn't cross it by road either. So the trust appointed various engineers. One of them was John Rennie. But finally, Thomas Telford was the man who came in and sorted it out. And the bridge was widened to twice its width on the road. And Thomas Telford also knocked these two arches together to actually create a proper navigation channel through the middle. Now, although they did that, it was only a temporary thing. They were still just working with what was effectively an ancient monument. And planning started almost immediately for a new bridge. And so what was constructed in its place was this 3 cast iron arch structure, 100 yards back downstream again. So back on the line of the old Roman road, we now get the Victorian bridge being built. And this is how we know so much about the Roman bridge, because when they were building this, they kept turning up Roman remains. And so we've got lots of reports of what they found. So we have 3 cast iron arches, and this weird thing at the end is a swing bridge, which was the idea was to let the boats through with their masts, fixed masts, and especially at high tide. In practice, that was never used because the bargemen of the Medway were so used to dropping their masts to shoot the bridge, they just carried on doing it under the much bigger arches in the middle. So eventually that was closed shut. So this was built 1856 by Sir William Cubitt. Again, another fabulous engineer, one of my civil engineering heroes, most famous as the consulting engineer for the Crystal Palace. He invented the prison tread wheel. He did the main line up through out of King's Cross up to the north, and lots of other things as well. So the elegant cast iron bridge was opened with a big firework display in 1856, and then we follow with even more spectacular fireworks, because to get rid of the old medieval bridge, they brought in the Royal Engineers and got them to blow it up. Which in terms of health and safety, can you imagine doing this now? This is your protection from the blowing up bridge here. You put your umbrella up. I mean, absolutely incredible. We're in a dense urban area here and they just blew it up, but there we go. And all the stone was rescued from the river and it was sold to the Admiralty for building Chatham Dockyard dock basins. So, and in the end, the trust actually made a profit out of the old bridge. Now, although this cast iron bridge that we have now to replace the old medieval bridge is a beautiful, elegant structure, nice artistic license here. You can't see the ugly swing bridge at the end. You can only see the nice arches. Much cheaper to maintain than the old medieval bridge. And so the trust started to build up a surplus, and it was able to start making grants into all its contributory parish areas for new schools and other bridges, which we'll come back to in a minute. However, in spite of all of that, the trust still had problems with this because I mentioned the very big tidal range. There was some quite serious accidents, impacts on the bridge, which took out tons of cast iron. This was the worst of the accidents in 1908 when the lighter diamond struck the bridge. How no one was killed in this, I don't know. But you know, an arch is only stable when it's complete. If you knock a big chunk out of it, you've got a very unstable structure. And this happened repeatedly. So the trust accepted they were going to have to do something about this. And they came up with a very elegant solution, which they managed to deliver while keeping the bridge open at all times, which is an important thing for my story a bit later on. And what they did was they brought in bowstring shaped trusses and put them on top of the old arches. raised the deck there and attached it obviously to the bowstring shaped truss on the top, and then very neatly took the arches out from underneath. So it's a really clever engineering solution to the problem. And then they decorated. So every surface that was still, they decorated it with something. This is just a close-up of one of the many features on the bridge, just to give you an idea of the quality of this casting and the amount of work that has to go into painting it all. But over the whole structure, we have lions, rams, bowls of fruit, crowns, basketware. I've got standing lions, sitting lions, lions' heads. It's absolutely covered in frippery and frivolry, which looks great, but my goodness, is it a maintenance nightmare. And the reconstructed bridge was then opened to traffic in 1914 by Lady Darnley, and here you can see it. And actually, apart from the tram lines and the fact that we've now got electric lights, it pretty much looks like this even today. And here you can see the modern structure as it looks now, again with all its fancy bits and bobs all over the place. So that's what we today call the old bridge. So it's a mixture of an 1856 structure and the 1914 structure, which makes it an absolute nightmare to maintain. And again, I'll come back to that. Now, this was obviously done in 1914, just before the war broke out. Only a couple of weeks before was the opening ceremony. Moving into the 1950s, car ownership went up, traffic levels went up. So plans were drawn up to construct a second road bridge to relieve some of the pressure. And another very clever engineering solution was worked out. So here you can see our old bridge there. This is an 1887 railway bridge on this side, also a listed structure. But in between the two was another railway bridge, which had been built in 1858 by Joseph Cubitt, son of William. And it was in that period where the Victorians, they wouldn't share the infrastructure. It was private companies, and so despite the enormous cost of bridging the Medway, they had two separate bridges. But of course, British Rail had come along, and no way were they going to maintain both bridges. So the wardens stepped in and actually bought the redundant foundations of British Rail for a nominal sum, and used those foundations to construct another road bridge on top, which saved them the enormous cost and risk of the bit building in the water, which of course is the bit that's most expensive and risky. So the bridge today, looking at it from underneath, I mean, no one can see this view, is this very attractive concrete structure with its steel twin box girders on the top. And if you just look closely, you can see down there, that's the Victorian brickwork still sitting perfectly adequately underneath. And in the refurbishment I've just had to do, I've had to do quite a bit of work on the 1970s structure, not had to do anything to the Victorian foundations. So, you know, they knew what they were doing, and or they didn't know, so they over-engineered everything. So depending on your point of view. So that bridge was opened in 1970 by Princess Margaret. And there is actually a third bridge. So here's our old bridge, there's the new bridge down the middle and the other railway bridge. And between them, you can't really see it, there is a fourth bridge at Rochester, third bridge belonging to us, which is our services bridge. So all the gas mains, electric mains, communication cables, foul sewer, clean water, everything goes across the service bridge. So I never have that problem you often have with highways where you've got to dig up the highway to do services work, because they're all in the bridge, in the service bridge separately. It was also done in 1970. So the Trust today owns the first three bridges, old service, new, railway bridge belongs to Network Rail. So that's our bit of the bridge. Okay, so this is looking at from the other direction. So now we're sort of hovering above Rochester, looking the other way. And you can see the service bridge a bit more clearly there, because there it is running up the middle. It's very narrow, but it's a separate structure. So let's talk about our refurbishment project then. So we're very diligent about our ongoing maintenance, I have to say. We do take very good care of our bridges. But over the last decade, as the list of things that needed a bigger level of intervention was starting to get a bit long. And I sort of liken it to car maintenance, if you like. You know, you can change the oil, you can top up your water, check your tyre pressures as you go along, but eventually you need to change your timing belt or whatever. And we were at that stage when we needed to do some bigger work. So in April 2019, we started on site with this once in a generation refurbishment. Now, for most bridge owners nowadays, the biggest challenge obviously is cost, and where does the money come from? As a charity, value for money is very important to us, but a much greater challenge is access and minimizing disruption to the bridge users. So what this image is showing you is the curve of the Medway. So this is the estuary here, and you can see all the urban area built up here, and sort of where I'm sitting, sort of out of this picture, is an even more dense urban area. And there's Rochester Bridge in the middle of it. There is a bridge over here, that's the motorway bridge, which is quite a long way out to get to it. And over here underneath is the Medway Tunnel. And those are the only three places to get across the River Medway. And our bridge is the only one where all types of traffic can use it. So we can't contemplate closing Rochester Bridge because the whole of local society just stops. You just can't, it just doesn't work. There are no supermarkets in Rochester. All the supermarkets are in Strood. Lots of kids that live in Rochester go to school in Strood. So you have to keep the bridges open. And also because we're in such an urban setting, I can't have a site that I can work within. You can't put hoardings around it. And I've got the public in and out of everything all the time. So that's the big challenge for us. It's not so much about the cost of things. It's about access and maintaining the crossing. And our primary charitable purpose is to provide a free river crossing of the Medway. So, closing it is not to be contemplated because that's what we're here for, our main reason for being. So we started work in April 2019. Project cost just over £12 million in the end. And as a charity which doesn't charge for any of its services, we're not able to reclaim VAT. So not only did we have to pay £12 million, we also had to pay another 20% VAT on top of that to the government. So they effectively got a nice grant from us for the pleasure of us restoring our own bridge. So there you are. Don't be a charity that doesn't charge for its services. So here we go. So after setting up the site, first job was to install the scaffolding. Absolutely massive job. £2 million of the cost alone was on the scaffolding. I mentioned the River Medway is very tidal. You can see the difficulties of putting that up there. Very tidal. So this is low tide, and you can see the actual foundations of the bridge are exposed there at low tide. You've got no water at all through this area. And yet at high tide, the water's right up to the bottom of that scaffold. So twice a day, your scaffold is gone under the water. And then when the tide goes out, you've got to go back and inspect the scaffold again, and it's all got to be cleaned down before anybody can get on to actually start working again. So the logistics of working in that scenario are very challenging. Because of the number of people that were working on the bridge and the risk of falling into that tidal water, we did a lot of really innovative training with people about how to handle a fall. A lot of the time they weren't tied on because actually it's safer to fall to the water with your life jacket and then to go through one of these exercises for recovery than it was to find yourself hanging from the bridge by a cable. So that was all very challenging. We have a lot of problems with attempted suicide, and all through this project we've had an awful lot of issues with vulnerable people. And so all the workforce were trained on how to talk and negotiate and work with vulnerable people on the bridges. And that's another important part that people probably don't realise, the sort of things that we're having to deal with. It was made worse by the scaffolding being there. It sort of made people feel that they could climb over things more than they would do normally. So one of the first technical jobs, we wanted to get rid of anything that was attached to the bridge which didn't need to be there anymore. So hanging off the side of the old bridge, dating back to before the service bridge, was all this redundant service pipes that people had said, okay, we'll put our new stuff in the service bridge, but they never took the old stuff away. Well, as part of this project, we wanted to get rid of all of that. So we've unbolted tons and tons of steel things. So all of this lot has gone, all winched off the bridge. And that's the sort of clear cantilever structure that had previously held up all that stuff. And then we've then taken that away as well. So now I've got rid of all of that extra loading. Previously, I was having to maintain that. I was putting operatives at risk going out to maintain something that was redundant. So we've taken this opportunity to get rid of it all, and it's allowed us to properly refurbish the sides and clean everything up properly. So that was quite a big job as well. Then we looked at the piers. So the old bridge is all masonry, so it's all handmade bricks, had to satisfy the conservation officer, all made, sample panels and all of that stuff to do huge areas of brickwork repair and replacement. It's actually in generally quite good condition, but even a small percentage of a bridge this size is a lot of bricks. And you can see the sort of standard of the quality of the finish there on one of the small completed repairs. We also had to do all the new bridge, which is all concrete, and we've gone through and repaired all of that. Again, fairly localised areas, but quite a number of them. On most of the bridge, the steelwork was in very good condition, but we did have one issue on the area that was that old swing bridge where the water had been coming through the deck. And you can see how bad some of this had got. And this was really tricky to get at. And this is back to this whole thing of changing from one structure to another. And it's not designed for good access. So everything's in confined spaces and, you know, really shuffling forward on your stomach and all that kind of stuff, really nasty working conditions. But we've got in and we've sorted all this stuff out. And it now looks like that. So I hope you agree that's a lot better than it was. And we've had to piece in some new steel and so on, as you'd normally do. And then you can see the underside of the new bridge here with all its new coats of paint, and everything's been fixed and repaired, and it all looks shiny and pretty much as it would have done on the day it opened. And that's the old bridge bearings, which are 150 years old. They look like they were installed the week before last. So that's all very good to see that, and they're all functioning very nicely. One of the biggest enemies on the bridge, apart from salt in my marine environment and water coming through the deck, road salts and so on, is this flipping pigeons, feral pigeons. We had lots of ledges in the structure of the old bridge, and we were absolutely determined we're going to get these guys off the bridge because the amount of damage they do, and again, the risk to the workforce. So we've put in over £100,000 worth of pigeon netting, mesh rather. We've got no loose netting because it comes off. Pigeons get trapped and die a horrible death. Pigeon spikes don't work and they fall off. So we've gone for rigid mesh and it's properly fixed to the bridge. And then it's got all these access hatches in so that we'll be able to get to it in future for maintenance and inspection. But that was a big part of the objective, was to get rid of the pigeon. Haven't quite got rid of all of them yet, but I'm chasing the last few down now. And we even had to do some fancy pigeon mesh at great cost into these open windows, which used to be the windows into the swing bridge mechanism room. So we had to have those made as well. So lots of attention to detail. Turning to the service bridge, this is what it looks like on the inside with all the different cables in the racks on each side. And we've refurbished this as well. And the main issue here was that the old roof, which is made of fiberglass, didn't go all the way to the edges. So this is basically a steel box, and you have a fiberglass roof over the top, so you get natural light inside. Because it stops there, the water just sheds off and sits in that trough there, and then of course it rusts and rots through. So it's a really silly design back in the 1970s. So we've taken all that horrible old fiberglass off and replaced it with a new fiberglass roof, but now it goes, oops, sorry. Now it goes edge to edge, so the water actually sheds off it properly, and we haven't got that problem anymore. And because it's all clean and whatever, you can actually see inside the service bridge without having to put any lights, artificial lighting in, which from a carbon point of view is obviously a positive. Okay, so that's the service bridge, and we also did the piers and the steel and all of that, and you don't want to know about that really. Right, looking at the new bridge then, 1970 construction. You can probably see here the lamp columns are actually integrated into the parapet, which is a nightmare because if you need to replace a lamp column, you can't because it's actually part of the parapet. And it was starting to go at the bottom, it was starting to get rusting through at the bottom. And I was starting to get worried that if we'd had an accident there, that not only would it damage the parapet, you'd end up with a lamp column swinging about as well because it was attached to it. So we've completely replaced all of that now. And that was a very difficult job trying to get it off. It all had to be done by hand. They're all roped on there because obviously there's a straight fall down into the river on the other side. And they had to do it in short enough sections so they could manually lift each section off the bridge. Because we wouldn't close the bridges to traffic, they had to work within this very narrow areas. So you can't get vehicles in or lifting equipment. So it all had to be done by hand. So that was a mega job. It was down for 5 days in the contractor's program, and it actually took 7 weeks. So there you go. And this is what the new parapet looks like now. We've got a recycled aluminium parapet. The lamp columns are on the outside. They are not integrated any longer. They're all LED, they're lower than they were before, which makes them less intrusive, and it's better from a light pollution point of view. So, and all our energy on the bridge comes from renewable sources as well. So we've got the carbon footprint right down in terms of operations. Then we had the whole of the surface off, right the way down to concrete deck. And a few patches of repair, some of them quite deep, as you can see here, and to fix all of this. And then you see the layers of waterproofing going back on parapet to parapet, make sure that water doesn't get through the deck and rust the steel underneath. And then one of the innovations on the project was we decided that we weren't going to have any longitudinal joints. So if you can imagine, normally when you lay a road, you lay a lane's width at a time. So if you've got 2 lanes, you have a joint up the middle. And that's where your potholes come from, is where your joints are. So we decided we weren't going to do that because we didn't want the joint, but also we didn't want to hold the traffic up any more than was absolutely necessary. So we did one overnight closure, just this bridge. The other one was open at the same time, just to be able to lay this surface in one go. And we've got a fantastic aerial video. If you're interested in this stuff, if you look on our website, you can see them working, and it's all set to music, because the number of people that were out there working with machinery and running one paver behind the other, and rollers and everything, all happening at once, is very tight shift pattern. And it looks fantastic now that it's all complete, but we don't think it's ever been done before on a carriageway, and that's what it looks like now. So you can see how smooth that surface is, and that's just a single pass from one side to the other without any joins. Old bridge turning over there, so we had to go through all this again on the old bridge. This was one of the interesting things we found. We turned up the old tram tracks underneath the carriageway, which are not supposed to be there, because according to my archives, they were all removed by a contractor in 1932, but they didn't take all the bits because I found them all again. And unfortunately, because of the programme that we were on and the need to finish on time, come what may, we haven't been able to take these out. So they've all been treated and they've been encapsulated back into the bridge again. So it's part of its history, but at least this time we've recorded properly what is actually still there. And then go through the same process again, waterproofing the bridge, ready for its new surface. We have to install all new expansion joints. Again, very manual job. They're working in quite a small space there. And then we did curb to curb resurfacing again on the old bridge, having worked out how to do it on the new bridge. We said, right, well, let's do it again. And it's another really good way. We didn't actually shut completely here. We just did some overnight closures just while they were running the actual paving machines, again, with the other bridge still open. The lighting's been a big part of the project. So we've got this really fancy stuff. I said about the Edwardian engineers, and they did like a bit of fancy. We've got some pomegranates there, oranges, apples. So where we could, we refurbished in situ. Again, quite an expensive way of doing things, but we didn't want to risk damaging anything by taking it away. But in some places, some of the lamps had gone missing over the years. And we wanted some extra ones to meet modern lighting levels. So we actually made some casts and used the Hargreaves foundry and actually made some new ones, which are exact replicas. I defy anybody to be able to tell them apart. And this is what they look like now with all their fancy paintwork on. And it's not just those uprights, there's also all this other detail as well. And all the lights on the old bridge, they've got new optics, so they are much more efficient than they used to be. And they are all LED and all renewable power source again. So the lighting quality is much better than it was. And we've also, here's look some more detail. There's a ram's head there, you can see a standing line at the top and a crest and all sorts of other bits. And again, these are new lanterns to the old designs. And that's what it looks like as you look back across the old bridge with these new lamps in place. And before we did this project, there was only one of those lamps surviving, and there'd been some horrible 1970s freestanding ones in the footway, which weren't very good from a disability point of view, blocking the footway either. So we got rid of those and created these new replica lamps, which look like they've always been there. And it looks very nice at night. It's a warm white light on the old bridge, which complements the heritage structure, whereas on the new bridge, which is much wider, we've used a much bluer light because that makes sure we get the full spread across. So I mean, the attention to detail is the key here. You know, you've got to think about everything, even down to that level, and it's worked very well. And we have enhancement lighting. So we now have coloured lighting, all LED again. We can have any colour in the spectrum. You can, each one of these steel members can be lit separately. So you can have dynamic effects. You can have colour sweeping backwards and forwards across the bridge and so on. And there's quite interesting lessons to learn there about making sure you have a policy in place before you switch them on about what you will and won't light up for, which I can tell you more about if you're interested later. We had an archaeologist on site, obviously, the history of things. He found all sorts of things he got very excited about. This is part of a late medieval river wall that he found here, but he found lots of other things as well. And we also found some modern archaeology, good old Medway towns. We've got a gun and an enormous bag of ammunition, which the police came and took away. We had some drugs, bits and pieces. There's all stuff that people have chucked in the river as they run away, I think. And these white blobs up here are oysters. The River Medway is actually full of oysters. I wouldn't eat them, but they do harvest them. And then we've also refurbished the sort of public realm areas that belong to us. This used to be really horrible, this area. Well, not horrible, just tired. So we've changed it all. We've opened it up to have better sight lines to the junction. And we've put in this series of benches and the new lights. And the benches are interesting because I was asked to put in some interpretation in this area to tell people the story of the bridge. It's one of the things we wanted to do. But I just didn't really want to put in sort of old-fashioned interpretation boards. So what we've done is we've put in 9 granite benches, and each one of them tells the story of a different incarnation of the Rochester Bridge. So you get an elevation on one side like this. So this particular bridge is the William Cubitt one that we were looking at earlier. And then on the top, it tells you what the bridge was. It tells you who the engineer was, because they never get the credit. And it's got an inspirational quotation about bridges, which is one of the biggest projects for me, was finding enough inspirational quotations that were actually about bridges. There's lots of metaphorical bridges, but I wanted real bridges. And then each one has a strip of the material that they're made of. So you actually get a tactile feature and something a bit extra just to look at. So that goes all the way along, and then we've lit them from underneath because I was a bit worried they just looked like these giant big chunks of stone, but by having this lighting they float, and that was the look I wanted. I said to the designer, I said that's what I want them to look like, and I think he's absolutely hit the nail on the head here. They look like they're floating above the ground, and that's now a really nice place where you would sit and look at the bridges and enjoy the river. And it's only a small space, but just about getting that attention to detail right. Okay, and here we are. So we're finished. Everything's done. It was to a very high quality all the way through. Finished on time. I said I'd be finished by Christmas, and I was. And it was actually under budget in the end, despite COVID costing me an extra £350,000. So I'm really pleased about keeping the budget in line as well. And yeah, it looks spectacular at night with all the lights on. You can do great things with those lights. Right, moving very quickly on now, so running out of time. One of the things we have decided to do retrospectively is to make this project carbon neutral. When we were designing it, we did have an eye to carbon, but not as strong an eye as I would like looking back on it, if that makes sense. So what we've decided to do is we've actually measured how much carbon was encapsulated in that project, and we've converted it into the number of trees required over 50 years to offset that carbon. And we're now establishing a new plantation, which is sort of ancient woodland of the future and proper mixed woodland with oak trees and all the rest of it, which will be, you know, sort of the carbon offsetting plantation for that project. And we've taken 10% of the trees that are needed to actually do local planting schemes. So anywhere where we've had to have a little bit of a diversion route, we've put in a blossom avenue, planning to plant that this winter. And we're also doing orchards for schools, and trying to get some actual fruit trees into local schools as well. So, you know, we should have done it from the start, but we're trying to make amends for not having done it by doing it afterwards. Right, what else do we do? Now, we have the power, but not the duty, to fund other crossings of the Medway. So over the centuries, pretty much every road crossing all the way from the estuary down to Tunbridge has been part funded by the Trust. So we've got, you can tell by the different ages of these bridges, over the years when these were done. This is a Sir Joseph Bazalgette bridge, so a lot of them are well-known engineers because the Trust always tried to employ whoever was at the top of their game at the time the bridge was needed. The most recent one is the top one, which is a footbridge in Maidstone. It was done in 2000, and the biggest one was the Medway Tunnel, which is the estuary tunnel crossing, which the Trust also initially funded, and so on. Now, these other crossings, when we finished building them, they go back to the local authority. We don't keep any of those. We only maintain Rochester. And then when we have a surplus of funds that we don't need for bridge maintenance, we're a grant maker. Education is one of the big things, starting with the foundation of the two girls' grammar schools in Rochester and Maidstone. They were both founded by the bridge wardens, but also various primary schools as well back in the day. So that's sort of when it really started. But we continue to do other kinds of education. So we founded what's called the Bridge Wardens College, which is a higher education college. We support Professor Alani, who's the Bridge Wardens Professor of Civil Engineering. We pay his salary and also lots of research projects. And our grant programme also does historic buildings, and we try and fund the things that no one else is interested in. So we do stained glass windows, we do tombs, interesting features of any kind of heritage building. These are all churches, but they don't have to be churches. I mean, we funded a charnel house not long ago and a Napoleonic fort and all sorts of things. As long as it's a historic structure and it's relevant to the history of Kent, then it's eligible. And we also fund projects for the River Medway, so whether they're connected with the history of the industry on the Medway or modern activities. And this is quite an interesting project. We're restoring a Shorts Scion float plane because the Shorts aircraft factory was just up the river from Rochester Bridge. There are lots of old photographs of the seaplanes taking off over the bridge. And there isn't one on display in Medway, so we're funding this restoration so we can set up a little museum to have that there. We also do lots of exhibitions, lectures, archive projects. So this was a recent exhibition called Bridgeworks, which is just the whole history of Rochester Bridge. We like to do lots of visual 3D type things, not too many words. So there's lots of tactile models, things that kids can touch, as well as all the fantastic documents from our archives, because we've got documents going back to before our foundation. We never throw a piece of paper away. So, if you want an invoice for a big biro in 1973, I've probably got one. It's that kind of archive. We keep everything. So it's, there's all sorts of interesting stuff to display. And the documents themselves are very interesting in their own right, obviously. And then we do lots of lectures. And here I am in the days when we were allowed to speak to people, real people. We love that, getting out and talking to people about things. This is in Rochester Cathedral. We do try and use big iconic venues because we find that half the people come to hear the talk and the other half come because they want to see what the venue's like. So that works quite well for us, is picking unusual venues. Not always as big as this, obviously we do small ones as well, but for the same reason, if it's a building that no one's normally allowed into, it's a good place for a lecture because you'll get lots of people to come. We do bridge tours, as you'd expect, showing hard hat tours, showing people behind the scenes, engineers actually out explaining why things look like this, how do the bearings work, let's have a look at an expansion joint, actually talking about how structures work. People really seem to love it. And we do other things as well. This is the Royal Engineers, who are based just up the road from us in Gillingham, and they send out their student soldiers to come and learn how to demolish bridges, would you believe? And they use our bridge as a case study. So we're helping them out by giving them a case study, but also we've turned this into a big public information event. We have like a hot dog stand and soup stall, and we take groups over the bridge, and the military engineers talk about what they're doing and what the Royal Engineers do and all that kind of stuff. So it's become a really good PR thing, and we do this at least once a year now. And obviously with COVID, we've moved much more into online stuff. So we've been doing online video tours, particularly aimed at children, but also the sort of interested member of the general public. And my colleague Kate's very good at this. She does these nice short videos about some aspect of the bridge. We give scholarships, two kinds of scholarship, to sixth formers who are planning to study engineering at university, And we don't just give them the money, we try and get them experiences that money can't buy. Well, obviously they could buy this, they're going up the O2 here, but we managed to get the whole lot of them up to the top of the Forth Bridges, which to get to the behind the scenes element of this wasn't widely available at the time we did it. So very much trying to get them to places that are going to inspire them and make them think, yeah, that's what I remember that trip. And we also give agricultural scholarships to undergraduates studying agriculture as well, because that's the background, our history of where our fundings come from is our agricultural land. Interestingly, we've been running this for 5 years and every single scholar has been female. I don't, not deliberately, it's just the way that they're the best candidates we've had come through. And then we have a big education programme. Here's our mascot, Langdon the lion. Everyone thought I was mad when I said we need a big mascot, an 8-foot lion. He's an absolute godsend, because not only does he tie together all our materials, he attracts attention when he goes anywhere. And if you've got young kids who are a bit reluctant to join in, he can sit on the floor and he will get kids to come to him and just come and have a cuddle. And then, you know, even up to sort of 11-year-olds will do that. And then you can get talking to them about, oh, well, let's just have a go at building this bridge. Let's stack these things together. So he's been absolutely brilliant, Langdon. And I've written a couple of books for children about engineering, which have now developed. We've now got a whole website. If you look at our education websites, with all sorts of resources on it on bridge building. We now have a team that does this and produces new resources all the time. And here you go, here's a classic example. There's Langdon demonstrating, and then the kids will get in and have a go themselves. We run these little challenge competitions. Look at their faces, bless them. You know, this is just building bridges out of junk. But when we do them, we've got science teachers and engineers on our team that run these things, because unless this science activity has got real science behind it, I'm not totally convinced of the value of just doing so-called STEM activities without really getting across principles in a fun way, which is why I'm absolutely, totally against spaghetti and marshmallows, which we can talk about if you want me to explain why, but that's a terrible, spaghetti and marshmallows is just my bugbear. I hunt the internet for it and abuse people that use it. So here we go again, you know, very young kids. This goes all the way back, all the way down to reception classes. We've done stuff with nursery kids. You can't start early enough, especially with the girls, because, you know, 4-year-olds don't know that girls are not supposed to be engineers. And that's the time to get at them before they get too far gone in our horrible society that tells them it's not right for them. And we can do this kind of junk modelling stuff. It's not just for primary school kids. This was an exercise using the inner tubes from carpets, and these boys are 17 and they're building a telecommunications tower to a brief. So much engineering in the discussion afterwards of what they were doing, why they were doing it, why it failed the way it did, how they could have done it better, all of that. So, you know, it doesn't have to be expensive, does it? All our exhibition stuff, we do an education program with it. And this lady is actually alive. Looks like she's one of the statues. And she's what we call the spirit of the bridge. So when we take children around our exhibitions, although they're designed to be accessible to kids, we find with school groups, she's brilliant. She actually interacts with them. She's a storyteller. She will draw them in to understand why would the Romans have built a bridge here? What were they thinking? Why did they do it? All that kind of stuff. She's absolutely brilliant. She just fascinates the kids as well. And the one thing that we're probably most famous for internationally, I don't know if any of you saw this summer before last, which was the adventure golf course in Rochester Cathedral, which attracted international attention, not necessarily for the right reasons. And the idea behind this project, from my point of view, is this is an education project. Every hole is a different type of bridge, and the kids would play this. It was free. We wanted something that families in Medway that haven't got much money could come to and take part in. Lots of them had never stepped foot in the cathedral before because it was intimidating, but this brought people in for a free activity. Some families came back practically every day because of this issue of how much it costs you with your kids in school holidays. And then alongside this, we were running all of our bridge building activities. So education by stealth, education through play, getting them through the door, getting to kids we would never normally get access to. This was an absolute dream. 30,000 people in 6 weeks we got through this project. So all the, I can understand why there were naysayers about having this in a cathedral, but the cathedral were delighted about it as well. So that's not my part of it. I wanted it for the education angle. But of course, it got a huge amount of publicity, and you may have seen some of it. We were on page 3 of the Sun. But yeah, lots of very negative, lots of social media trolling. I had all sorts of abuse. So just, some of the things you learn that we weren't maybe expecting. But from an education point of view, fantastic success. And we took it to the Institution of Civil Engineers and ran it for adults as well. So again, gets people talking. And there we go. I'm sorry, I'm slightly over time, but we couldn't go much faster. There is a lot to talk about, but I'm very happy to take any questions about anything. Thank you for your attention.
Wow. I don't think you need to worry about going over time. It's absolutely fine. Very, very, very interesting. And I know one of the bell ringers at Rochester, and he sort of volunteered for lots of extra shifts because of the golf, honestly.
It was great.
He really enjoyed it, he did. And I was fascinated actually that you mentioned Morpeth Chantry, because just behind me, that brown frame is a picture of Morpeth Chantry and Telford Bridge. And I don't know, Rowan, if you want to say something about Morpeth Chantry.
Just that I was very disappointed when you were so specific about the geography of your funding, because our poor wee chantry, although the council have done a lovely job in tidying up some growth over the spring period, it does look in a bit of a sorry state actually. It's very much leaning towards the bridge it was designed to protect, but it is a beautiful, beautiful building. And actually the keeper of the collection, who plays the Northumbrian pipes, is with us tonight as well.
Okay. Well,
but that was a phenomenal talk. So I had thousands of questions and you kept answering them, but it was just wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, don't rule out talking to me about your Chantry Chapel, because I have done some stuff for Rotherham and Wakefield that I actually came and spoke and sort of ran a medieval history day for them, talking about the story of the chantries and the chantry movement and bridge chapels and how bridge chapels work and all of that. So, we may not be able to actually sort of give grant funding for works, but there's other ways we might be able to help out with things. And depending on what needs doing, I might even be able to push my trustees to find some money. You never know. It's always worth asking. Don't ask, don't get. Yeah.
It would be lovely if you could visit. Sorry, can I ask a question? I've got loads of really, really geeky questions. I know we're over time, so I'll try and be brief. But those the castings were absolutely beautiful, and I'm slightly obsessed with castings. Do you know which foundry they came from? Were they local?
Hargreaves Foundry. Very good, very good.
And was there much? One other, sorry, on a foundry theme, and then I promise I'll give the chair back. But I was absolutely blown away that those tram tracks weren't recycled in 1932, because certainly there were a lot of folk, albeit a generation later, but that started their industries on recycling tram tracks in particularly the 60s and the 50s. But I just wondered, was recycling materials part of what you were able to do? I mean, it was awful the amount of funding you lost through the VAT, but were you able to reclaim anything through some of that enormous amount of steel?
99.8% of recyclable material was recycled. There's obviously some material like things like waterproofing and obviously asbestos, where we took that away, that we weren't able to recycle it, but all the metal, all the steel was. And interesting with the tram tracks, most of the actual tracks were gone. What we're left with is the sort of the bits that go across between the tracks and some of the sort of associated metalwork. So I think they took out the easy bit. Anything that was embedded into the deck of the structure, they just left it behind and surfaced over the top of it. Yeah, I expect they took the good stuff.
Oh, well, it was just phenomenal. So interesting, and so many things that we need to make a concerted effort to emulate and learn from. Just really, really inspiring. Thank you. There was a moment though when you showed the medieval bridge going that I think everybody who knows and loves Berwick had a
wouldn't do that now, would you?
tail of breath.
Well, I found it absolutely fascinating the way you explained that you felt obliged to keep the bridge open. It's far easier for us because it's just been that our bridge has just been taken down like a Lego kit and taken away and tested and cleaned, and it will go back together again. In fact, Becky's actually designed a workshop for children to do, a testing workshop, which does involve Lego, and they have to test and replace the flawed components, some visual inspection, and I think you've used UV light as another, I think, haven't you, Becky?
Yeah, that's right. Not just me, of course. Team effort on the workshop, and obviously had help from NUSTEM. But yeah, we do a little magnetic particle inspection with a UV torch, basically.
That's absolutely brilliant. That's the stuff we love. Is actual practical applications of how a reflection of how it's actually done. That's really important to do those things like that. That sounds really interesting.
Well, go on, Matt.
Sorry, I've got a couple of probably really boring questions as well, so apologies. I thought that was really properly fascinating. So I think you're right in that you could probably spend the next 24 hours talking about the bridge. You mentioned just there actually that Carol was saying it's fascinating that you were sort of able to keep the bridge open. Were you able to provide access to river traffic while the scaffolding was up? Because I couldn't quite tell from the pictures.
Yeah, no, we were required to keep one span open at all times, which again was a bit of a logistical issue because then they sort of finished the section underneath and they were chomping at the bit to get to the next one, and we're saying you can't because you've got to. So yeah, no, we had to keep one navigation span. Although I have to say, river traffic on the Medway is mainly leisure traffic nowadays. It's not the industrial river that it once was. But,
Thanks for that. And my other question was, I saw that I thought I saw some text on one of the girders which said cargo fleet, and I just wondered if the steel came from Middlesbrough.
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
That's the 1914 steel, yeah.
Well spotted. I honed in on the Morpeth thing because I'm from Morpeth, you see. So
I used to work in Middlesbrough till about 14 months ago, so that's why.
That's fantastic. So has anybody else got any questions? Jules, yeah?
Yeah, hello. That was brilliant. I really enjoyed it. It was amazing to hear all about just how the community was really engaged by your interpretation. I mean, the history, but how they were really involved in understanding more about the bridge. And I just wondered, in the sense of connection you were able to create. And I wondered, people often take bridges for granted, and I wondered about that with Chain Bridge, and if you have any thoughts there about people's engagement. It just the interpretation was just so powerful, and it's a very different scale of bridge and very different, how it's less embedded in an urban setting, and I just wondered if you had any thoughts there.
Well, it's interesting, even though the trust has been there for 620 years, still some people still think the bridge belongs to the council. So we've still got that even now. But in general, we work quite hard all the time trying to engage the public. And what I was very keen on in this project was not to lose all that goodwill. And one of the key things we learned very much was social media cannot be underestimated. Through our busiest patches of work, we were literally 24/7, and that was we've got an external communications consultant that works with us generally, and between Erica there and me, we were constantly checking. It's incredibly stressful. Wouldn't recommend it for your mental health sometimes, but we were able, as soon as anyone came in and said anything critical, we were able to respond, and we were not defensive. We decided right from the start that we would explain what was happening. It was all about explaining. So when people were saying, oh, this is taking too long, why can't you do it overnight in one shift? Something that takes 6 weeks or something. By actually explaining what was involved and how it was being done, actually it diffused so much negativity. And then we found that as that went on and we were being seen to not being defensive, but to try and explain what was happening, we sort of built up this cohort of supporters, I suppose, who then started doing the job for us. So sometimes before we could even get to somebody moaning, one of the other people had said, oh yes, but that's because of X and Y. And it was like, yeah, victory. So, but it's this whole thing about not being defensive and to actually try and explain things to people, because they are interested if you take your time. But the other thing that really helped us, which I'm sure most people will relate to, is that because of everything I said about this being the heart of the community and everything, I insisted that if there was a lane closed, somebody needed to be doing something. So we never had that situation where you're sitting in a long queue and you get to the bridge and the lane is empty and nobody's working. And I wouldn't let the contractor do it. Absolute headache for them. But in the end, they got on board with it. And they've actually just now won the refurbishment of Blackfriars Bridge by presenting what they learned on our bridge about how to make sure there's always people doing something. And I said to them, even if there's a reason why you can't be working on the bit you're actually working on, so like an expansion joint, you're waiting for the concrete to harden or something like that, I said, then's your opportunity to get the sweepers out and sweep the rest of the bridge while you're waiting, or put some lights up or paint something, or, you know, there must always be people working. And we spent a lot of time with them making sure that their work plans had that happening. And that was a big thing with the community, that they were never able to say to me, you know, there's never anybody there doing anything. And in fact, it's still paying dividends now 6 months on, because I get emails and social media saying to me, oh, I wish you moan at the council saying, I wish you lot could be more like Rochester Bridge. You never see their contractor disappearing for days, and we didn't allow our contractors to smoke on site. They weren't allowed to stand and chat on site. They need to do that in the welfare unit. When they're out, they need to be working, doing something, pick up some litter, do anything, but be seen to be doing something. So
it's brilliant. It was really hands-on, and it was hands-on for the people that were engaging with it as well, sort of people in the community. So it's really nice to see that. And I wondered, because it's a very dramatic sort of bridge as well, and I'm gathering verbatim and stories for a play I'm hoping to write about the chain bridge. And so and I was interested in what you said about the spirit of the bridge and the kind of personifying through the lion as well, and those techniques. I thought that was really interesting. And I noticed you talked about the enemies of the bridge, and you talked about the pigeons. And this is a slightly tangential story, but I was interested in first from a materials point of view, what are the enemies of the bridge, chain bridge, and also are there any pigeon-like enemies or
salt, water, pigeons? That's the three enemies of bridges. Salt, water and pigeons, and people, of course, but we don't like to talk about them. But yes, that's for us, that's the three things, because we're obviously in a marine environment. I'm not sure, are you tidal? I'm not sure.
Right on the cusp of where tidal becomes normal river. That's a very British thing to say.
We are, but you will have a little bit of salt in the water.
Yeah, it's a site of special scientific interest because of that unique. There's a special word for it, which I did know last week and I've forgotten. For that kind of environment, that's sort of brackish water, and that's why it says an SSSI.
Have you not got pigeons? I'm sure.
No, we've got pigeons in the south at the coal mine, but it's pied wagtails and mallards that have been causing issues for the Union Chain Bridge.
Pied wagtails, that's a new one. I haven't heard that one before. So the same problem, is it guano that's causing the problem, or?
No, it's nesting.
Nest. Okay.
Yes, Daisy the duck held work up on that aspect for quite a while, didn't she, with her nest?
We thought we might have bats, but we did a huge number of bat surveys and we never found a bat. So it looks like a perfect site for bats, but there aren't any.
Oh, thank you very much. That was great.
You're welcome.
I have one further question. Oh, sorry, go on, Diane, after you. Make sure you're unmuted. That's it.
Yeah. Hello. I just wanted to say that was absolutely fascinating. I loved it. The bridge it makes me want to go down there and actually go and have a look at it, because I can't believe how, all the decoration on it and all the lighting and everything. It's amazing how much you've put into that bridge. It's a work of art. I was absolutely blown away by it. I loved it. So I've taken a few notes, which I will pass on to my team, which they naughty boys, aren't they, not attending? But if you send me through the video of it, I'll make sure that they do get to see it, because it's well worth it. And there is things we can learn for the Union Chain Bridge from that as well, especially, you know, the pathways and everything else, how you did that, just amazing. But yes, but thank you very much indeed.
Oh, good, you're welcome. I mean, if anyone does want to come and see the bridge, apart from COVID, I would leave it till 2022 anyway, because we're just refurbishing our bridge chapel to bring it up to spec for an events and exhibition space, and also to make it fully accessible, because you can't get upstairs at the moment, we're putting a lift in. So it's better to wait until that's finished, and then you can come have a look at it as well. So.
Lovely, will do. Thank you.
I know exactly what you mean about taking bridges for granted. I've been to Rochester so many times, obviously been to the cathedral and to the castle and danced at the Sweeps Festival and things like that, and just gone over the bridge and not taken the slightest bit of notice of this marvellous thing. So my wrist is well and truly slapped. One question that I did say I was going to ask, if you wouldn't mind, Sue. We are part of the project, we're trying to address exactly what you talked about with children in school, especially girls, with their perception of STEM careers. And we've been working with Northumbria University on this. This is when Becky mentioned a new STEM, that's the sort of science education group that's based there. And they've told us that all the sort of literature about education shows that as early as early years, girls already associate being a scientist or being an engineer with something that clever boys do and not they do. So we are, like you, going in very early and trying to make that change. And as part of that, we're developing a series of little short videos, little 2-3 minute answers really, talking about people's personal qualities, rather than focusing on you could be an engineer, just, you know, sort of this is the personal quality that you have. Oh, look, this engineer has to have that personal quality. Oh, maybe that's the thing that would suit you as a person. Do you see what I mean? That kind of approach. So I think warn you by Helen that I would be asking you, what personal qualities do you need to do your job?
Can you think of a better word than bolshiness? Because I mean, certainly for women in engineering, having that attitude of if you tell me that I can't do something, that's going to make me want to do it even more. And if you tell me that that's not really a suitable job for me, well, therefore I'm going to find out more about it, and I'm damn well going to do that job. And that's the thing which I think when I talk with other women engineers, that's the sort of common factor. It's a kind of I'll show you kind of thing. But I don't know how to get that in one word, apart from bolshiness.
That's perfect.
Is what my school would have said. I mean, just interesting what you're saying about that. One of the things we definitely focus on is what we call family engineering, because a lot of that research, I don't know if you've seen the report that looks at the influence of mothers on careers for daughters. And unless you know engineers, lots of mothers of young girls just don't really think about engineering as a career, and they actually cause the problem quite innocently by just never knowing what it is, and that's a big thing for us. And so what we've tried to do is make sure we do lots of family things. You know, we've been to into infant schools and actually run a sort of like an after school event where the mums come in and they actually have to build a bridge as well and work with their children, and just to sort of get them used to the idea that it's a realistic possibility. So actually working with mums particularly has been quite a big thing for us. And I've got staff who've all got toddler age children, so we've built up a huge collection of books of, you know, girls driving tractors and just all those kind of things, just exposing kids even before they're reading to books that actually show girls doing these things is quite important. But yeah, families are key.
Definitely. Rowan, did you want to say something?
Yeah, utterly shameless on that note. Please, can we borrow your golf course?
Can you borrow my golf course? Probably. We can talk about that. They've got quite a strict policy because everybody wants to borrow it, so they try and not let it out too far, but we can talk about that.
You can trust us. We're taking down a bridge and fixing it, so you can trust us.
Thank you.
No, it's not that. It's just that if we didn't have a policy restricting it to Kent, then it would, you know, just be a bit of a nightmare. And it is quite big, as you can see. But you can use it for small, you know, a smaller number of holes and things like we did at the ICE that time. But yeah, we can talk about it. You're a bit of a long way away, but.
Thank you. That's very generous. We just evidently just need to lure you up to the north, but that was wonderful. Thank you so much. So inspiring. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'd like to thank Sue and to thank all of you for coming. And I know there's sort of quite a few other pulls on people's emotions tonight. We are going to take a short break from our online talks. We won't have one in August, but we will reconvene in September with a talk by Catherine Tiernan, who is a local author of a trilogy of novels set here in North Northumberland and the borders in the 10th century. But this will be a hybrid event, hopefully, or fingers crossed, all things being well. So people who are local can attend in person, or if you're not local, you can attend online just like this. And also with your Zoom link tonight, you should have received a link to a short survey. It's literally about 5 or 6 questions, but it would give you the opportunity to tell us how much you enjoyed today's talk. I think we're probably pretty much agreed it's 11 out of 10. I know that doesn't exist, and that probably annoys an engineer to say 11 out of 10. What we could do for subsequent talks to make them suit to what you want to do, and to find out about any questions that occur to you overnight. My brain is whirring, and I think I should be emailing Helen several questions for you, Sue, tomorrow. And if you'd like to be kept informed of the talks programme or the project in general, you can sign up there. We won't use your email address for anything else, I promise. But before we say goodbye, I would again like to thank you all for coming. And Sue, I think you can take yourselves all off mute and give her a really lovely round of applause. That was so inspiring. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much for coming. See you in September, hopefully.
Bye-bye.
Peace.
Don't worry, Neil's watching the football.
Oh, good. Well, she was brilliant, wasn't she?